Watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning. We are here on Teachers Talk Radio for Points of View, and this morning we've got Lucy, Yasmin, Liz, and myself, Ray. So how is everyone doing in October?
Tired.
Liz is collapsing live.
But I'm ready. I don't know how I'm going to get through the next week. We'll see.
I've got 1 week left as well.
Brutal this half term. You forget, I think every single year I forget how hard it is. I'm exhausted.
I feel like this half term, it's like it really hit me like a truck. Like I don't know what was different about this year, or if I just don't remember previous years, but like for the first 2 weeks of this half term, I was coming home from school, going to sleep, straight to sleep, getting up at like 1 a.m. for my dinner, and then going back to bed again. Like, yeah. I mean, the fact that I've got a Coke can at like, I know Tom would be proud of this, but I mean, I'm just fueled purely on sugar right now.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Yeah. I feel like my situation's kind of the opposite. I feel like this half term's, I mean, no, I'm dying inside, but this half term has gone very quickly compared to previous ones. I think because we've had a lot of changes in the school, and a lot of day-to-day things for classroom teachers has got easier and less stressful. So I feel less dead than I did this time last year.
We need a show on that. We need to know what the changes are that have made you feel completely different to the others. I'm not in education anymore, so I don't have a half term. I just sort of roll along, as it were. But my memory was always that the half term we'll be going back into was the hardest for me. I hated that one. I hated it because I 3 kids, so I had Christmas to sort out as well, and oh my word, it was just miserable. But
I find the one before Christmas worst. Yeah. The one,
you're more likely to be ill.
Yes, you're more likely to be ill. It's just as long as the first half term is.
It's
and
dark.
In spite of all everyone's like, ooh, it's festive. No, it's not. It's forced fun. It's forced fun and obligation. And people expect you to be jolly when you just want to lie down on the floor and like curl up and cry. I hate the next half term. So I'm just trying to like get through this one.
I struggle with the dark. I've already started to get to that point in the school year where it is quite dark when I leave in the mornings. I find that sad. I mean, next half term it will be dark every time I leave.
Well, it won't, because we're changing the clocks, so it's going to get an hour lighter.
It won't be.
Yeah.
Initially,
it will creep back.
Yeah, quite quickly. Yeah. But yeah, November. I don't have anything good to say about November.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
There isn't anything good to say about November. It's mock season for us when we come back after half term. So obviously, particularly as English teachers, that means so much marking. So it's that dread of getting through that. But we've had some change in my school as well, Ray. We've got a new head and second in department, and they've got a slightly different philosophy towards things, which is improving workload. So I'm hoping we're going to see the fruits of that, which is really good.
We need to do a show on this.
Yeah, because it sounds like your schools have the answers. So
some of them. I feel like I mean, maybe this is me. I don't know. I don't know. There are some members of SLT in my school that Okay, let me back up. So last year, when things were less good for classroom teachers, some people felt, I'm trying to be so careful with my words here. Some people felt that some people higher up could have done more to relieve the stress for the people at the bottom, i.e. us, classroom teachers. Now, I feel like people higher up are working so hard, constantly doing so much stuff that they never get to sit down. And that is a huge, huge part of why things are easier and better for us and for the kids. But walking around, you do see some members of SLT who seem to have lost the sparkle behind their eyes. Oh. just kind of like walking zombies of exhaustion. So I feel like they would have a very different opinion to term has gone in terms of their own physical, possibly exhaustion levels. But I think it's hard to make changes or institute any kind of positive change or change of philosophy while making it better for everybody. I feel like in order to make things in school, and at least initially, if you're going to make things easier for some people, it's going to become harder for others until things kind of reach some sustainable equilibrium. And we're not quite there yet. So, yeah, it's been great for me. I'm fine.
That's good. And maybe this is a controversial thing to say. Nobody should be feeling exhausted in schools. I don't think that at any level anybody should be feeling exhausted. But I do think that if you take on more responsibility, you should have more work than people who are on the lesser pay. Like maybe that is a controversial thing to say, but I have worked in places before where I've thought, I think I'm doing a significantly larger amount of work than people who are further up the chain than me, and that can breed resentment. And I think that's quite. And it sounds like things have changed a little bit for you there, Ray, which has got to be good. And you want to hold on to your teachers at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there was a moment a couple weeks back when there was a situation where someone someone above me hadn't done something that they were supposed to do, and I did what I could to fix the thing in the moment, but I didn't stress about it. And I said to somebody else, "It's like, I'm not bending over backwards to cover for someone who gets paid more than I do. Like, that's the bottom line. I'm sorry. I've done what I can."
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Could I, before we get started on the topics, could I tell you about our show's sponsors? Because Hachette Learning, this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explain the full range of titles. And then we've got the Chalk and Talk podcast. So if you're looking for another great education podcast, check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stokey. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based maths education for students of all ages. On her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching maths facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers, and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And then we've got AQA, because AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA We Work with Experts.
So we have a topic that kind of makes me really glad that I made the life choices that I made. I was saying this to you guys earlier. When I first moved to this country 15 years ago, I had a whole debate about where I wanted to live. And I really wanted to be in London, but then I also really liked Scotland, but I'd never been to Scotland. And I was like, oh, maybe I can go both. And then I realized very quickly they're different systems. And teaching, it's not terribly difficult to move from one to the other, but they're not exactly the same. And teacher training in Scotland took longer than teacher training in England, and I just ended up going to London because it was faster and it was London and whatever. And that for the past 15 years, I've been thinking, what would my Scottish life be like? What? Where would I be? What would I be eating? What would I be wearing? And I'm so glad. I'm so glad I'm not there right now, because Channel 4 News has just released this piece on violent injuries against school staff in Scotland. And this has been in the news for a while now, the behaviour issue in Scotland, and the numbers are frightening. So the increase in the past couple of years is drastic. Teachers are leaving the profession in droves specifically because of violent behavior, not because of other things like pay or workload or anything, specifically because of the violence they're experiencing. It's drastic compared to other parts of the country. In England and Wales, for example, the rates of violent incidents in schools are much, much higher in Scotland. And the Channel 4 piece was suggesting that perhaps, and they're getting this from teachers who have been raising this for a while now, that perhaps a lot of this is because of the restorative approach that Scottish schools are taking, just not deterring violent behavior and not providing any consequences for violent behavior and allowing it to magnify. So does anyone have any opening thoughts on that delightful topic?
Well, I'm happy to go. So I've watched a couple of videos because I wanted to find out more about it. I was looking for something that would contrast Scotland with England, because the most could be a difference of 1. It could be, and these are adjusted obviously for population size. And I couldn't find the information I was looking for, but what I did see just raised so much alarm that the overall feeling is that actions in schools in Scotland have very few consequences. There seems to be a reliance on restorative justice. So what tends to happen is all the way through the school system, so you learn from a very young age that you can kick a teacher, you can threaten to stab a teacher with a pair of scissors in one thing that I saw, and you'll be taken out maybe to have a little chat, have a little play, talk about these things. And what happens is other children see this and they think, well, I'm stuck in the classroom and Bertie's out there kicking a ball and that looks like more fun, and then they so that learned behavior in very young children is that you get rewards through antagonizing behavior through to aggression. I saw one thing about a teacher who was locked in a small room with a student, and she was, I think, teaching either years 5 to 8 or age 5 to 8, I can't remember which. And this child threw chairs at her head and she woke up. So she obviously lost consciousness. She now has neurological conditions and eyesight, like vision problems. These are huge, huge issues. This is, this is far bigger than anything I've ever seen or known about. One of the things that they were talking about, I watched a sort of a chat. I don't know what channel it was on, but it was a Scottish education panel sort of group, and it was only 10 minutes. I didn't see all of it, but they had a lady on from the Commission on School Reform, who was a former head teacher, and she gave figures. She said that unions had done some investigations, and in the last 2 weeks prior to that investigation, they asked teachers how many of you have experienced, and it was 97% had experienced lessons disturbed by mobile phones. 67% had experienced verbal aggression and 59% physical aggression, and 49% of teachers have witnessed violent episodes. So these are huge, huge numbers, and that was just in a fortnight through responses directly from teachers. So this is an enormous problem, and her feeling was that there's such a reduction now in the number of exclusions in Scottish schools in favour of these sort of chats and restorative justice. There are no penalties anymore. You can set detentions, and anyone who works in secondary school, which I did, you know, they'd say, all right, put him in detention. You'd think, great, so I've got to do that at the end of the day. I've got to add it to the system and remember to do it, type in all the codes, all this kind of stuff. They don't turn up. They don't turn up. And if they didn't turn up, there was the Friday night 2-hour detention with the principal or senior leadership. And they didn't turn up to that either. And then it just continued. And these are the problems, she said, that is leading to this feeling amongst students, which isn't incorrect, that there are no consequences. So you can go as far as you can, as far as you want to, and only in the most extreme episodes will there be anything. And one of the statistics I got to before I had to stop watching was in 2007 there were 44,000 exclusions. Now, one thing they weren't clear about was whether this was nationally or just in Scotland, but because the numbers are huge anyway, but I'm suspecting it's just in Scotland because it was a Scottish program. It was a sort of a local news type program, I suppose. It's only 12,000 exclusions now, and she feels, and the debate was just going on with some guy saying, but do you think that's the thing that's going to solve it if we kick children out? And he was sort of had that softer approach. I shall watch more later, but that's what I know about it from what I've read and seen.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think from working in schools, I'm not surprised that those numbers have gone down so significantly because, sorry, I think it's really difficult to exclude now. And I think, and you see a lot of headlines about exclusions and really painting schools in a terrible light, suggesting that it's something that we just do immediately and we don't try and deal with the problems first. But as seeing it happen, it's really, really difficult to get to that stage. You have so many hoops to jump through, and so therefore there's a lot of behaviour that's come before you get to that point.
Yeah.
So the fact that those numbers have come down as far as they have, when actually, certainly in the 20 years that I've been in the classroom, behaviour is the worst it has ever been now. Though I think those numbers should be going up. So it suggests that what we're doing isn't working. The restorative approach doesn't work, and it certainly doesn't work when it's really serious behaviour. Okay, if a kid, you know, throws a paper aeroplane at another kid across the classroom and whatever, okay, you can have a little chat about that and you can try and put some restorative justice in place. But if a kid throws a chair across a classroom, a nice little chat and a lollipop, you know, and off you go back into class, that's not solving anything at all. It makes a mockery of the system, really.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yasmin,
Go on.
I've got mixed feelings. I personally feel like restorative practices get scapegoated a lot for issues that are beyond them or far bigger than just whichever behavior management strategy that you use. Now, I don't want to be too crazy, and I will say that I do think that a lot of the time restorative approaches alone, they can't be the standalone behavior policy in a school. I think that's really unfair on both pupils and staff, and I think the people that often get the shorter end of the stick are either staff or very well behaved pupils. But at the same time, I do feel like restorative practices get scapegoated a lot. Honestly, I think the alternative would be, like, I've got an issue with the alternative just being high levels of exclusion. I feel like Scotland, I don't know too much about Scotland, but like what I did read up on, you know, there were really high levels of, I mean, I might be wrong, but what I did find when I looked into this was, you know, that there were high levels of unemployment, there were high levels of like risk to youth after they'd left schools, that, you know, there were high levels of social care, there was just a lot of things. And my guess would be restorative approaches were introduced to schools in an attempt to keep children in schools for longer because of the fact that it's such a big protective factor. And obviously, the longer you stay in school, the better life chances that you're likely to have. So I feel like that's probably where it came from. Now, when I saw this report, obviously it would make any teacher or just any normal person really uncomfortable seeing, you know, the things that I read about someone having their a member of staff having their foot stamped on and, you know, their toe broken, and like Lucy said, somebody ending up with neurological issues, literally getting brain damage because they've gone to school and have been harmed by children. Like that's crazy. Like I wouldn't have any issue with a member of staff even pressing charges if something like that happened to them. I genuinely wouldn't have anything to say. But I don't know, like I just feel like restorative practices get scapegoated a lot. That's just how I feel. I'm just warming up.
No, I get that, and I feel like I think you're right. I think well, I don't know what's going on in Scotland, and I don't know if people are saying, you know, you throw when a teacher gets neurological damage. In that case, I don't know if the kid was taken out for a chat and a suite and a, you know, little calm down moment to regulate himself. I don't know if that was the case in situations like that. But I think in the bigger instances, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a school anywhere that would only do that. Like, I feel like there are other things at play. There are other things schools do, even in Scotland, whatever's going on up there. Like there have to be other things that schools are doing. I just basically refuse to believe that it is all about.
No, I think that I'm pretty sure that I can't remember what her name is, but there's this person who used to be like head of something in Scotland, and she introduced a lot of the restorative and like trauma informed practices. And I think now I might be making this up, but I think this is right. She is now head of the violence reduction unit in London and has introduced a lot of similar things in London. I can't remember what her name is, but I'm going to try Google her now. But I think it was her kind of legacy in Scotland. Like there was definitely like a deliberate attempt to move to more restorative approaches. And so when I was watching this clip, was it Channel 4 or ITV?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really matter. But when I was watching it, I did feel like it was kind of like a dig at this person who did really change a lot of the, like on a widespread scale, on a huge scale, changed a lot of the policies in Scotland so that schools, I think there are schools that just have restorative approaches. But I also want to say, I feel like restorative approaches or trauma informed practice is very misunderstood. I feel like what it is, one of the things that makes it more different to the traditional behavior approaches, or what people call zero tolerance, which I often don't really think is zero tolerance. I'd say only like, you know what I find sad? I've seen schools, okay, now I'm talking about too many things at once, but I've seen schools with zero tolerance, or, you know, quote unquote zero tolerance, that get criticized, you know, silent corridors, etc., that actually do far more for vulnerable children. They're often from, you know, large academy chains that sometimes have more money than a typical school would, and sometimes even pay for like private intervention for their pupils. I'm a governor at a school that's like that, and what I find quite funny is sometimes in our local area there are people who know nothing about the school that will criticize it and say, oh, you know, they probably send pupils terribly and they probably do this, that, or the other, but actually they don't. And I think for me, one of the things that I like more about restorative approaches is I feel like it considers preventative measures more than a traditional behavior management system. And that's what I like about it. I'm not going to deny that there are a lot of flaws. And I also don't think the way that schools are set up and the way that now there are so many like societal issues that feed into schools and there are so many funding cuts, I don't think it's sustainable to just have restorative approaches on their own. But what I like about them is I just feel like the idea of treating or having like a set of having ways in which you treat your most or consider your most vulnerable pupils, and then applying that to everybody to try give them chances to improve their behavior, as opposed to traditional approaches, which I feel like is just, okay, you've done this wrong, here's your detention, here's your next behavior point, here's now your escalated detention, here's now your fixed term suspension. I get it, like, yes, there are loads of hoops that you have to jump through, but I just feel like the onus is often just placed entirely on the child. I just feel like there's too many things that don't work, like reports, or there's just loads of things that don't work in my view. But because you've gone through all the paperwork correctly and you haven't breached any procedures, you could then go on to permanently exclude that child for persistent disruption. I just feel like that's what a traditional behavior management system is. And so what I like more about restorative approaches is the fact that I feel like it's not just reactionary. I feel like it's more preventative, but I also don't feel like it should just be a standalone. But what I didn't like about this article or this like clip was it just kind of ignores, actually maybe it didn't, I don't remember, guys, I saw it a few days ago, but I just feel like there's a lot more in society that isn't really being considered. It might have mentioned COVID. I think it did.
It did.
But yeah, okay, so it referred to COVID, which I do think is important, but I think also just how schools now are kind of like really isolated, that they're like the therapists for children, they're like a hospital for children, they're just everything. And I feel like that plays a huge hand in what's now happening in schools.
It's really interesting what you said, Yasmin, about like people not really understanding restorative justice. And I think a lot of the issues probably that we see in schools do come from parenting, and I say this as a parent myself, so like I don't feel like I'm being in any way hypocritical. Like I think millennial parents particularly are coming under a lot of fire because of how we parent, and I think there's a massive confusion about, well, that's exactly it, because there's this gentle parenting which is and I felt under pressure from that, like you're not supposed to shout at your child, you have boundaries or whatever, but lots of people are struggling with the difference between what is gentle parenting and what is permissive parenting. And the problem is everyone's actually ending up permissive parenting, and it's like you're not actually holding any boundaries, putting any boundaries in place. Your child at home is not getting those strict controls, and so the first time they hear the word no, they're hearing it at school, and that is going to inflame problems, because it shouldn't be it should be parents, it shouldn't be teachers who are the first people saying to students, no, sorry, you can't do that, no, that's not, I'm afraid you can't do that here, that's not. And so those problems, that misunderstanding of what that looks like, is creating problems which schools are then trying to solve, which again, if in schools we're not fully understanding what restorative justice is supposed to look like, there are misinterpretations about how that's used and when that's used and when it's effective, we've actually got not very effective controls on anything. We're not managing anything well, which is then potentially leading to these really excessive behaviours like Scotland is seeing.
I'm so glad you made that comparison. I'm so glad, because I was talking about this with somebody the other day. You try and have a restorative approach, or you work restorative conversations, etc., into a functioning behavior policy, so you can actually treat these children like the human beings that they are, and you treat teachers with some sort of dignity and respect, who actually deserve to have a conversation with someone who's thrown a chair at them. It's in everyone's best interest that you have conversations at an appropriate time in an appropriate way, and try and fix a problem without necessarily screaming at people. But you end up with this like overly permissive, ridiculous situation where there are no consequences. And I think it parallels what's happening with parenting so much, very closely. Absolutely. And as a consequence, you have these kids that have no boundaries at home. They have no boundaries at school. We are sending them out into the wide world. They're going to think they can show up 2 hours late for a shift, not wearing dress code, and that's going to be okay. Like, no, you're going to get fired and you're going to be broke. And we're actually trying to help you. And they just don't get it.
Do you know what I find so funny though about gentle parenting? Like, I completely agree with you both, Liz and Ray. But like, I don't know if any of you guys saw the stuff about Mosborne, the Mosborne last year or earlier this year. You know how there was like loads of stuff in the news about them treating children horribly, and I think somebody, I remember seeing on the news, I don't think it's happened, but I remember seeing on the news that they were considering doing like a really high level safeguarding inquiry into their practices, like the level that you'd use for like children that were like serious victims of abuse and things like that. And what I found really interesting about that was I kind of associate this whole gentle parenting with, I feel like it's more of a middle class like phenomenon. Like I honestly feel like, you know, that schools in Hackney, my understanding was a lot of the poorest families from, you know, the local council estates, the people that had like grown up in Hackney, etc., their parents were all for it. You know, it was improving the life chances of their children. A lot of the time, you know, they're from communities that have a lot of respect for schools and expect their children to listen to what their teachers tell them. And how I perceived it, I mean, I might be wrong, but my perception was it was actually the like new kind of demographics that have moved into Hackney in maybe the last 10, 15 years who believe in this, you know, who have this gentle parenting ethos and don't like the fact that their children are being told what to do at schools, because they see themselves as parents who know exactly what they're doing and will support their kids to be whatever they want to be in the future and can afford to support them to be whatever they want to be in the future, and don't really like the idea of, you know, their science teacher telling them off for not holding a conical flask properly or whatever, you know. So I feel like, I mean, I feel like class isn't like what it used to be, if that makes sense. Like I feel like it's a lot more, it's a lot more like inextricably linked than maybe, I just feel like it's less defined than it was in the past. And like it's not really an important thing to me, but I do sometimes feel like the parents that are most likely to complain about a school or cause problems for a school aren't necessarily the same parents or the same people that are stereotyped or get maligned as being the problem in schools.
I think you're right.
If that makes sense.
I agree with you massively on that. There are so many issues at play here. No, people are losing knowledge of how to parent because we live our lives in isolation. So in the past, you had older siblings who you lived near, who had children, and you saw how they parented. You never thought about how you parented. You just did it in the past. Parents just did what came naturally. And it is a natural instinct to tell your children not to do something, to pull them away from danger and things. And now all these ideas have come through over a long period of time. I mean, I'm a lot older than all of you. So I started school in the 1970s, and I went to a really permissive kind of primary school that was sort of, you know, my mum sort of described them as being, you know, very, very, very kind and very quite child-led. And then we moved house, and I moved to a school that was an old Victorian building with very old teachers, and they had a completely different attitude. I mean, in my first week, I had to stand on my chair because I didn't know my 7 times tables. But that was because we had at my primary school, it was just, hey, you'll learn it as you go along, that kind of thing. So you can see how those teaching styles can have an influence on children. Now, I was a naturally really badly behaved child, not violent, none of those things, but I was just naughty. I talked all the time. I didn't do what I was told, you know, in terms of, right, everybody start writing about your story. I'd be sat there, you know, in my dream world, or I just didn't, you know, I wasn't very focused, I suppose would be the thing. And so I found it hard work. But if you think about it, if you are fairly dysregulated in a fairly dysregulated environment, that must be much harder for you to understand what role you're supposed to play. So you know, my mum was really worried about my behaviour at this initial school that I, you know, my infant school that I started, and I was starting getting with the wrong children and things. But when I moved to Fairfields, well, shouldn't have said the name, but it doesn't matter, there are loads of them everywhere. But suddenly I started to have to comply. I knew what the rules were. I knew, good grief, I'm gonna have to learn all of these timetables that I haven't done yet, because otherwise I'm going to get into trouble. I was stood on my chair for not colouring in the grass on a hill properly because I sort of scrawled it all over. It was so strict. It was so strict, but it was good because I knew exactly what was expected of me. And when I went to my secondary school, which is again in a different area, it wasn't the greatest school in the area, and I again was able to sort of slip through, just keep below the radar of, we used to have these grey slips if your behaviour was bad. I never had a grey slip. I was very, very good at sort of keeping just below, but I was disruptive in a low level way. I was a difficult student, but if you enable that, in my experience, and I think my experience counts in some ways, where I knew what the rules and boundaries were, I had something to comply with. I knew where I had to be, and the examples of where that was less enforced, I tended to feel less required to do so. And I think that it's a huge problem. There are, we have children growing up in homes where there are no rules, there are no boundaries. They go to preschools where they're encouraged to play with whatever they want to. The difference between my sons and my daughter going to preschool, and there was sort of 5 years between the youngest son and my daughter, they would have the cars out on a Monday, and then on a Tuesday they'd be allowed the train set out, and it was on an 8-day rolling program, so you always got to have a go at something. By the time my daughter went to preschool, they had play times. You go out to play at this time, and then you have a snack. All of that was gone. There was no snack time. If children were hungry, they could eat, and if they wanted to go outside, then they could. And it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare for the staff because trying to keep the ratios right, having to stand in and out of the doorway to supervise all of those things. And unfortunately, I think what's happened is those progressive experimental ideas in education settings have spread into parenting settings as well. So people have these ideas, and of course the reason it's the middle classes, as it were, and I agree with you, class is a strange thing now. It's sort of it no longer has sort of set sort of regions, I suppose, but they're the people who are accessing this information. Those are the people reading the books and trying different things, and that's the problem. And then you've got these children who have no restrictions at home, no boundaries, have never heard the word no at home, suddenly coming into a slightly more permissive environment, and from a home with no structure, and then just not knowing how to handle themselves, literally not knowing how to behave, because they don't have the underpinning structures that the middle class children have, where there are still rules. No, you can't get down from the table, that kind of thing. Suddenly to this environment where anything goes. No wonder we are having so many more problems now, because we are not telling children how they should behave, and I think that's a huge problem. And it seems as though, tying this in with the overall topic, this seems to be worse in Scotland than it is in England, according to the data. And I think that the reason for that could be because of the less restrictive or less disciplinarian style that's being adopted. And so you're right about Yasmin, when you say about the restorative justice having a place, but it's not all the places all the time.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? It's I've had conversations with colleagues over the years. There are some students who come to you, and again, being in a secondary setting where you do tend to see students again and again and again over time, there are some students that you get in year 7 who are just on that borderline, who you could catch, you absolutely could catch with the right approach and stop them from bubbling over into that very difficult behaviour. And you can spot them quite early on. You can see them, and in some cases the restorative approach can work well with those students, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they need much firmer guidance and much firmer boundaries, because school is the only place that they are getting that. And we kind of owe it to those kids to, this is the wrong word, but save them, to stop that. And I think there was a criminological theory, it has been debunked I think since, about the broken window, and how one broken window can cause one place to fall into complete disrepute, because if it's unfixed, gradually everything else goes. And I do think that can be the case. I think if you let something slide, that's where everything starts to fall apart. Like
it's not been debunked. It hasn't been debunked.
Oh, has it
I
not?
know of. No, it's still very much a theory.
Because I think it works. I think
Yeah,
it applies.
absolutely.
And I definitely, I've seen it in every school that I've worked in. You see students that are, you know, that you've got the exceptions. So you've got students, well, they're allowed to have their earpods in because they need that for their regulation or something like that. And so then you're telling them, well, can you take your earpods out? And they're like, well, no.
Yeah.
They're allowed to have it. Why am I not allowed to have it? And it's you then can't say, well, they're allowed to have it because it's their regulation strategy, blah, 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 blah. Because that's how, I mean, you can't tell them that anyway because it's personal, but also it sounds that, well, what if I need it to regulate? And then it spreads. And I get it. I understand why these things are in place, but it does make it. And again, when you're looking at, because I've always worked in the southeast, and so predominantly schools in this area tend to be kind of much more middle class in their socioeconomic and certainly the schools that I've worked in background, and there is a bit of an exceptionalism culture. I think it's like, well, this doesn't apply to my child. My child gets this, my child gets that, and that's really difficult to combat.
Do you know I was literally I'm so happy that you brought that out, because I was gonna say I often feel like it's not necessarily the policies or procedures in a school that's the issue. What causes the bigger problem is exactly as you said, exceptionalism culture. And sometimes I feel like there's no one I agree with more on Twitter when it comes to, you know, criticizing exceptionalism than, you know, someone like Tom Bennett, who I typically don't agree with. But when it comes to stuff like that, I really do, because I feel like what lets a lot of children and schools and actually everyone in that school environment down is exceptionalism. When you've got one kid who, for whatever reason, somebody's taken a liking to and decided that they can, you know, be out of class because, you know, you're trying to help them, or they can have something or the other, or they don't go through the same kind of procedures or policies that are in your behavior policy, whatever the behavior policy management style is, then that, for me, the bigger problem. And I feel like that's what happens a lot of the time in schools. I think a lot of the time, you know, the schools, like, you know, like I said, I wouldn't call them zero tolerance, but just, you know, saying, because that's what a lot of people say, a lot of these schools with zero tolerance who also happen to have really good results, but then are like criticized by a lot of people. I think a lot of people are praising the behavior policies that they've implemented, but I actually don't think it's just because of the policies that they've implemented. I think it's the fact that it's usually the schools with the most consistency that have the best outcomes in every single respect. And that, for me, gets overlooked. I think my problem with restorative approaches, I mean, I don't really have many problems with it, just saying, but but I think it's not only massively misunderstood by the people who don't like work in schools that have them, but I also feel like sometimes even within a school environment, even with the best intentions, I sometimes feel like staff don't really get good training on it. There's just too much room for your own interpretation, and you therefore can run into problems. I remember once I worked in a pupil referral unit where we had, it was, honestly, it was like the most trauma-informed place I've ever been to. And I think that is typically the case for a lot of PRUs. Like, you're not really going to have the same policies that you'd have in mainstream. But, and even as somebody that cares a lot and like is invested in restorative approaches, even I was a bit taken aback at points. But I remember like children were allowed to bring vapes to school, but they had to hand them in the morning. So they all had like labeled folders or whatever, or like locker, just somewhere where we'd put their stuff when we won them in the morning. And they were allowed to hand over, you know, they'd be expected to hand over their phone and their vapes, etc. And they'd be kept somewhere safe until the end of the day, and then they'd all be given back. I didn't agree with vapes being given back. I was completely against it, but like I was outnumbered.
Literally illegal.
They were given back. They were given back.
Like, it's literally illegal. Like, you can't. Or is this some American boost in the 20s thing where like it's illegal to buy it, it's illegal to hold it, but it's not illegal to drink it? Like, if you're a kid with a vape, you can't actually buy one or sell one, or exchange one for anything, but you can. It's not actually illegal to.
I said it so many times, but I think the idea was, well, the kids vape anyway, so at least at school they're safe. So we'll take it off them, and then we'll just, we'll give it back because they're not our responsibility at the end of the day. I don't know. I don't remember, but I was against it. And often if I was doing the wanding, I would take the vapes and throw them away. But
because anyway. Then you were I'm so sorry, Yasmin, but then you are literally as an adult handing a vape to a child, whether or not it belongs to them.
Yeah. So the policy was,
that's mad.
I know the policy, but like it was rooted in trauma-informed practice, and I'm not trying to like put trauma-informed practice down. Like I've made clear, like, I'm massively in support of it. However, the policy was the only, like, where the consequences came in, or the sanctions was, but if you were caught with your vape in the school day because you didn't hand it in, what pupils often would do is they'd hide it in their shoe when they're coming into school in the morning. So unless you were like really good with the wanding and got them to take their shoes and stuff off, it would be like quite easy to miss otherwise. Like people often just wand you up to the bottom of your leg, like your ankles, and then just stop. If you didn't hand it in at the start and you were caught with it in like a lesson or in the corridor or in the toilets or whatever, or like a staff member took you to the toilet and then when the door opened it smelled like Skittles or whatever, even if you didn't see the vape, then the vape wouldn't be given back. And so I spent a long time saying, but that's making the issue the fact that the child lied to you, as opposed to making the issue the vape itself. But anyway, I remember one time I was teaching a year 11 lesson and I just saw this cloud of smoke when I turned around. Like I honestly turned away for like a split second and I saw this cloud of smoke. And I just thought, yeah, like it's one of these like two pupils who have a vape. So I just thought, sometimes if you just fake your confidence, like, like I just feel like you always kind of have an upper hand over kids. So I was like, I saw it, hand it over, but I didn't see, I just saw the smoke. Anyway, like after arguing with me for ages and like completely derailing my lesson, this kid then eventually does, like, you can just tell by their body language and they're like their hand hovering over their pocket, whatever. He handed it over, and so I immediately emailed on call, and a deputy head ended up coming to the room, and when he got there I said he had a vape. Like the policy was a child is removed from the class, and if you're caught with a vape, then the vape, well, this deputy head actually was the one who made the policy, and he used to say, I'm going to smash your vape and throw it away, if you don't hand it in the morning. So I thought, yeah, great, like there couldn't be a better person to show up to my lesson right now. Great, just send them on their way. And then maybe 10 minutes later, this kid comes running back into my lesson. So what had happened was the deputy head decided that because the kid had been going through things, that he would give the vape back to him and say, make sure you don't do this again. And so the vape changed, like it went from the vape being the issue to me being the issue, essentially. And this kid then ran back into my classroom and ended up saying something in a foreign language. I think it was Bengali, but this wasn't a Bengali pupil. And I figured it was Bengali because of the reaction of other Bengali children in the class. And one of my best friends in teaching is from Bangladesh. So I just texted her and just phonetically, like, just kind of wrote it out and was like, what does this mean? And she said, it means black monkey. That's what she said. And so I then, obviously got the kid removed again. But when we had SLT after school that day, like I was explaining to everybody, not having or making any exceptions can have serious like safeguarding and behavior consequences, because I've now been racially abused by a pupil because you thought it was trauma informed to be concerned about what was going on for them at home, and therefore breaching the behavior policy that you created and told staff to adhere to. Do you know what I mean? Like it was.
Well, kids learn, don't they? Kids learn. Yeah. Well, if I say I'm having a hard time, if I say, well, things have been difficult for me, I get away with it. I knew where you were going with this story. I knew the minute you started, I thought it is going to be what always used to happen in our school. Hey, miss, I've just had a chat with Bertie outside, and he says really he had the chair up because he was passing it to somebody. He was not. Do you mind if he rejoins the lesson? Yes, well, we're going to pop him back in. No, it's just awful. And it's that permissiveness. Kids are, their whole job in life, our whole job in life overall, but particularly when we're children, is to learn. And so they learn from every little thing that they see. Well, he got put back in the classroom because he said that, he's got this or that happening at home. I can make up stuff like that. I can say I've got that because nobody questions it either, do they? Nobody, and that's the difference between now. I mean, when I was at school, oh my goodness, I remember a girl who we always used to think she just had lots of accidents. And as an adult, I look back and I think, oh my word, she was an abused child, but she always had bruises, and she had an iron imprint on her leg once. And once she fell out of a car, and we were like, oh God, how unlucky to fall out. Well, of course she didn't fall. It was just horrendous. But, these things have never not happened. But if school can be your safe place and somewhere where what the rules are, where that if somebody is going to pick up a chair and aim it at you in the classroom, that will be dealt with, then that takes an element of trauma away. If you're traumatized at home and then go to school and don't know if you're going to be bullied or picked on or abused or get in the crossfire even of a fight between other students, then that's a horrible experience. And I suspect, I don't know, I'm no expert whatsoever, but you have to question whether for many children who are school refusers, whether there are issues like that are going on that could be dealt with by better behaviour policy, following through on behaviour policy, and on having very strict boundaries that say, if you do this, you're gone, you're out, you cannot come back to this school if you behave like this, or you will be sent home for a number of days if you behave like in such a way, or internal exclusion or whatever. But those things need to not be nice. And that's the other thing the middle class parents said, it was awful because, my Bertie was sat in a room on his own for whole days, and all he had worksheets, and it's just awful. This isn't education. Do you get what I mean? And you can see that undermining that's coming in from all aspects of education, all different types of parents, and then teachers and leaders who come in with their new ideas, and maybe the old ideas should be not entirely brought back in. I don't want the cane, I don't want things like that, but maybe we just need to look at knowing what we're expecting from children at school. And
there is middle ground, isn't there? And I feel like we've gone to like a crazy place where it's like it's so black and white. It's either this or it's this, but it isn't. There's a lot of grey, and it is possible to make grey work. Lots of schools are making it work, like Yasmin was talking about earlier. And I think, Lucy, what you said about undermining, I think that's the key thing. What happened with Yasmin in the anecdote that she told us, like it's the undermining of her authority in the classroom that was done, and it happens to us all time and time again, where it is that, oh, that's my most dreaded thing. We've had a chat and they're really sorry. Can they come back in? No, they can't come back in. If I called you to get them out of my classroom, I want them out of not for 5 minutes. I want them gone. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Well, look, can I talk to you again about our show sponsors, please, just before we round up? So Hachette Learning, this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explain the full range of titles. And then AQA, because AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as soon as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to learn and find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work With Experts. That wasn't word perfect, but
I was also going to say, and I feel like I've mentioned this so many times, but I also feel like there's like a cultural issue in this country where I don't think it's normal for the media to put down schools and teachers so much. Like every year, like clockwork, you see, articles in September with someone with their arms crossed on the cover because, they've refused to wear school shoes or because of their hairstyle or whatever. Like it's like clockwork, right? And like I use TikTok. And there are so many times I come across videos of teachers being like covertly recorded in class, having like a moment, towards a pupil who's clearly like, has to have done something wrong. And it's like viral, it's funny to laugh at, teachers and laugh at them being upset or to, laugh at their lesson being derailed. That like sells, that gets engagement. And I feel like until that is addressed on a national level, it doesn't matter if you're zero tolerance or restorative, like you will have teachers like suffering forever if that isn't dealt with, because it's not normal to have
undermined.
Like we're undermined on a national level everywhere, and until that's addressed, like I just feel like there will continue to be issues. That for me is a huge issue, and I've said this time and time again, but I feel like the children with consistently the best outcomes, if you split outcomes based on ethnicity or whatever, are always from communities that hold teachers in very high regard. And that for me isn't like it's not a mistake, it's not a coincidence. It's because if your starting point is that you respect teachers, you respect your school environment, you will not only cause a lot less problems, but you will probably also be from a family where if for whatever reason there is a disagreement or something they're not happy about, they will respectfully raise that with the school, or maybe not even raise it at all and just accept that the school have the authority to make the right decisions for your for your child as a stakeholder in their life. And so for me, until the fact that on a national level teachers are undermined is considered. And I also just want to quickly throw in, I don't feel like the union does a good enough job like supporting and helping teachers. I'm sorry, I've got a huge gripe with the union as somebody who's had to like rely on them in the past in my first year of teaching. I have a huge issue with the amount of teachers that I know have contacted their regional reps or have contacted the NEU and are under this illusion that because you're paying like every month, that in your time of need you're going to get the right support. But they often just guilt trip people and say, deal with it, go to HR. We can't justify spending members' money on a court case for you or whatever. And not saying that everything should go to a court case, but
not likely enough to win, so we will not be supporting. Like
just saying I had a tribunal as an NQT, and like for disability discrimination, because I was newly diagnosed with a condition. Ray knows all about this. We used to actually work at the same school, but I remember going to the union and like I swear they threatened me more than the school did. I'm not even joking. Like they, like you can't resign, otherwise we're not going to give you any legal aid. So I didn't resign. And then afterwards, like they spent years telling me you've got no like reasonable prospects of success. And I remember like sometimes I honestly didn't know what to do with myself. And just saying I did win, but yeah, they like dropped my case. It was just there was a lot that happened. They dropped my case and then picked it back up like the night before my tribunal like started. But I don't know.
Unions need to do more. They need to do more. They need to do more to help us and help.
It's sad. It's really sad because a lot of the time teachers do not get the support that they deserve to get or the advice that they deserve to get. There are people who are subject to allegations or all sorts of things, or like, parents can easily have a WhatsApp group chat where they target somebody. I know people this has happened to for all sorts of things. And you just end up kind of alone after, giving so much of your life and your career and your time to, the betterment of the children and their lives and their futures. And like, I know a lot of people that are just kind of disillusioned because of the behavior, not just from pupils, but also from colleagues and from the wider community. And so for me, it's a cultural issue. I feel like until the teachers are like the most important people in society, I just feel like that there will be problems. And it doesn't matter what behavior policies a school have, until all teachers are like respected everywhere, you're just going to run into problems.
We talk about young people and being bullied all the time, but I feel like it's never really talked about that actually teachers are bullied all the time by young people, by parents, sometimes by colleagues in SLT. You know, we are punching bags, metaphorically, and as we started talking about today, in some cases physically. And you know, we're not soldiers, we're not in the military, we didn't sign up for that. You know, we signed up to educate. Why does that make us terrible people? And yet somehow we are.
and it's why, like, I don't think I'd ever move to like the Middle East. It's just not my vibe. But I know a lot of teachers that have moved there, and like I can't like I feel like a lot of the time, you know, people accuse them of, oh, you know, you just want more money or whatever. But I know people on really good salaries here that have moved away, and I don't think it's about the money. It's the fact that you know, that there is a culture of respect. You know, education is respected, by extension teachers are respected. And you know, being able to go to a school where you could get through a whole day of lessons where no one's told you to shut up, or you know, caused any problems, or thrown a chair at you, or stamped on your toe and broken your toe, or you know, giving you neurological issues, is like, it's important, you know. So and again, like, you're never going to fix the recruitment and retention crisis until you address the fact that teachers, as you said, Liz, are a punching bag in many respects across the country and in Scotland.
But it can be achieved, and I know maybe I sounded very draconian Victorian, but we have to remember that what people see as Victorian now are these schools that have the zero tolerance, that also have the corresponding superb outcomes for children, very often from backgrounds where in the past they would have failed, you know, and those are described as Victorian. So we really need to assess what works, because I don't know anything about those environments and whether the teachers are happier in those places. So I don't know that, but certainly the whole role of teaching is to get the best outcomes for young people, for them to be able to learn, for them to be able to feel safe. And if you're not managing all of those things, which those schools in terms of students seem to manage, then something's going very wrong, and we're ending up with a situation with a lot of children who are being tolerated for intolerable behaviours because we believe that they have to be in school, which they do, but we could actually change things for them. And my view is you have to make sure that when children come to school, they know what the expectations are. And I just don't think that's the case all the time now. In fact, very often it's not. And it sounds like in Scotland that's one of the bigger issues. And like I said, I wish that we'd had comparative figures to understand what's happening in England and what's happening in Wales. And we didn't have those figures, but they're clearly not in the same situation. And there is a lot of sort of investigation to be held into what different places are doing differently, to try and establish a framework under which schools should all operate. Which doesn't mean they're all the same, by the way, but it just means that, you know, the expectations are the same, and that you're not going to end up needing to call the union because the school that you work in now doesn't like the way that you're teaching or you know, disciplining students, as it were.
Okay, well, that was a very interesting chat. I forget how these shows are supposed to end, because last time I was on one, Tom Rogers just got cut off mid-sentence and they went to the end jingle. So I've kind of been expecting that to happen. I've been expecting somebody to be going blah, 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 and then suddenly it cuts to the music, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
It's actually Tom in the background, that's why.
And I thought he would have done it by now, even though I didn't cut him off.
He knows how it feels. I think that's why he's let us run
along.
He's
a nice person. Okay, that's fair enough then.
So right, well, we'll say bye.
Yeah.
And
thank
we'll
you for
sit
listening.
and watch and hope we go.
We're meant to like walk away in like tears.
No. I feel like if he was going to ruin our lives, he would have done it already.
Outstanding, a world-class vision,